Welcome to Vinak Media English program, all distinguished guests and then participants. Today we will have a topic to discuss with our distinguished guest, Honorable Girmay Haile. Girmay Haile is a veteran of Eritrean freedom fighters, former diplomat, and international civil servant. Our discussion will be focused on geopolitical development and then both the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa region, through the prism of Eritrean history, political doctrine, and then culture. So let me introduce you again, as Honorable Girmay Haile, to our audience, and then I'll invite you to join one Eritrean music until some of our friends and then guests join us. So let me bring to the audience Honorable Girmay Haile. Salam, Girmay Haile, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me today.
Thank you very much. And just as you know that before about 6 months or a year ago, just we started this program, and I know that previously used to be on the form of Zoom. You were given some historical background about Eritrean history and then the struggle, what we did for our Eritrean users and then their friends. And the first time in Vinak Media, we had the second part, and then today, this is a third part, even though I didn't mention it, the first, the second, and the third one. So definitely we know that this is the third part. Just all the youngs or users who join with us, they know this is the third program. And definitely you were very busy. And then some of the youngsters and then people who were organizing this one, they were very busy visiting back home and then personal issues. So just because of that, so a little bit we were late. So I apologize for our audience and then users who were very interesting and then waiting this program. So just let me ask you one question and then I'll go to my music to join with us, and then we'll see how many people are going to come and then join us. And then what is the intention of this program? What is the main intention, and then who you are focusing with, and then what is the reason?
Thank you very much, Binyam. The program is supposed to be a series under the title Let's Talk Eritrea. It was primarily designed for first generation Americans or other nationalities of Eritreans who were born and raised abroad. And it was also meant to be delivered in English, and also allow them to also take part in the discussions. It was supposed to be an interactive program. So right now, as you know, all the questions that we're going to be discussing tonight have been forwarded to us by the youth from various places. And I also want to thank Tsagahapte, for doing that for us. She's doing a lot of work behind the scenes in getting in touch with the youth, young people, getting their questions, discussing issues with them, and then finally presenting it here. So it is aimed and geared towards young Eritreans in the diaspora who may not be able to speak Tigrinya easily, but it's also for all who care to follow up on updates, and also non-Eritreans, a lot of other colleagues and young people, especially the Gen Zs of Africa, who can also learn a little bit about Eritrea.
Thank you very much. Just he explained it very well, and definitely we collected all the questions from Eritrean youth and diaspora. Right now, most of them are from United States, majority of them, but we try to reach out all our young people from all over the world. And please allow me to present some of the questions which is collected from this group. And then, but first, let me go back to the music which is I selected. It is in Tigrinya and English. As a matter of fact, I don't know if Honorable German knows about it, but just I would like to let you know that this music is presented and collected by one of our main participants, and then she was from the beginning get to go present a lot of music, and I'd like to appreciate while you are here, Eritrean Melody, who is giving us or allowing us to use this her different music. Just always we use it as a introduction of our program. So at the same time, this Eritrean Melody, thank you very much while you are here. So just let me introduce you on music and then we'll go.
Thank you.
ኤርትራውያንና ናፃን ሓያላትን ተሃኒስና ኢና ብእምነትን ሕድርን ዘውዲ ዝደፋቐና ኣይንደሊዝና ሃልሃልታ ዝንክኽኹል እዩ ሽምና We are Eritreans, free and strong, built on faith and loyalty. We don't seek fame that crowns us. Our name is enough to make sparks fly. فتطلعنا بركخن نحصى فرحن السلطان قوقاس أبنك دي حقي تفتنا عندنا أضحو كم وقت إرترا بدكا كتكون كربته We will never kneel to lies and fear. We walk silently on the path of truth. We have been refined in fire like gold. Eritrea will be proud of its children. نمبركخ نتقلوت نمسكن أملاخنا نذكري سماعتاتنا أطفف بركنا حجرنا كنحلو نمبركخ نتكس فتون نتكابو كبرنا نشيدن نترفو نسراحيدنا عايزر قاحن To kneel to pray, we thank our God. To remember martyrs, we bend our knees. To protect our country, to kneel, to stand firm. We will never sell our dignity. Except for work, we do not stretch out our hands. نخبرنا شيدنا دلن عين بلن كبرتنا حجرنا أحليفنا ينحبن برسامر كوسا دون بلبيننا علم تسمح لوني عين بركخننا فكري إيري ملوء يقدم احتمتنا We will not stoop low by selling our dignity. We will not betray our dignity and our country. With self-reliance, we stand alone. Let the world hear today. We will not kneel, but love for Eritrea fills our blood and bones. ኤርትራውያንና ናፃን ሓያላትን ለምትን ሰይነብል ክንፍቶ መሓልትን ንፍቕሪ ንሰላም ዋጋ ንኸፍለለን ፍጹም ቦታ የብልና ንሓሶትን ስለትን We will never kneel for lies and fear. We do not waver when we are tested. For love and peace we pay the price. We have no place for lies and hatred. ኤርትራውያንና ናፃን ሓያላትን ተሃኒስና ኢና ብእምነትን ሕድርን ዘውዲ ዝደፋቐና ኣይንደሊዝና ሃልሃልታ ዝንክኽኹል እዩ ሽምና We will never kneel to lies and fear. We do not waver when we are tested. For love and peace we pay the price. We have no place for lies and hatred. Hatred, hatred, hatred. Our heart is not ready. Hatred, hatred.
Okay, thank you very much. I think just enjoyed the music, and thank you very much at the same time for Girmay for the patience. And then I'll go directly to the questions. We do collect about 9 or 10 questions, so I don't know if we have enough time, Honorable Girmay, to answer all of them, but just with our time limit, and we'll see how far we're going to go. And then if we didn't finish it, so just definitely we're going to have another program to finish or continue these questions. So there is a lot of technical issues. At the same time, also there is a time because Ambassador Girmay have different things to do, so just the time is limited. So hopefully he will try to wrap it up faster, the question. So I will go straight directly to the question. These questions are like I told you, and then earlier or so, Honorable Grima, I told you we collected from the users who were having a connection with us at that time. So that's what was the question was collected by Gurmai, and at the same time with the Gahabte. So thank you very much for both. The first question is, Ambassador Gurmai, why does every Ethiopian leader believe they are entitled to the Red Sea? Is there any historical or legal basis for this sustained claim? What is the real motive behind the recent Ethiopian claims? I mean, the recent claims, so I don't want to go detailed to finish to take the time, but especially when 80% of its population, Ethiopian population, lacks access to the food, health, and social security, a high level of internal conflicts in the Tigray, Oromia region, and then Amhara region, and the political crisis that have taken the country to the brink of collapse.
Well, of course, this is a complex and highly charged issue that sits at the intersection of history, geography, economics, and Ethiopian expansionism. When we break down the question into its core components, we see some key issues in it. The historical and legal basis for the sustained claim is that Ethiopia's claim to the Red Sea is not a recent invention. It's deeply rooted in history, though its legal standing has always been weak, and more so in the contemporary context. Ancient and medieval periods, the Aksumite kingdom was a major naval and trading power that controlled the Eritrean seacoast in modern-day Eritrea. The history of this era has been manipulated by British Empire supported historians of modern-day Ethiopia to represent the golden age in the Ethiopian historical consciousness, and is frequently invoked as proof of their natural connection to the Eritrean Sea or the Red Sea. This continues to be highly contested because the Aksumite Empire was a shared civilization of Sudan, Eritrea, Abyssinia, a small part of present-day northern Ethiopia, and Yemen, as well as the rise and fall of Afrocentric or Semitic kingdoms that were predated by the Nubian, by the Balokalo civilization, the Demit, the Punt, and the Adulicity civilizations. Therefore, it's completely absurd and fallacious for Ethiopia to claim its Abyssinian link to the Aksumite kingdom as a sole history of modern Ethiopia. As you know, successive emperors, particularly in the 19th century, sought to control access to the sea through ports like Adulis, Massawa, Zela, and Asab. Emperor Johannes IV and later Menelik understood that sea access was critical for modern statehood, trade, and military power development, but both focused on ports that had close proximity to their fiefdoms, to their kingdoms, rather than applying a collective strategy for the wider Abyssinia. But neither of them managed to control any port or even administer territories adjacent to the coastal areas of the Red Sea. It is a common fact that the Ottoman Empire occupied and ruled the entire stretch of the Red Sea coast region for close to 400 years and then taken over by Egypt briefly. This period cemented the landlocked status of Abyssinia, later Ethiopia, until the 1950s. The Italian colonialism replaced the long-term occupation of the Red Sea coastal regions by Ottomans and the Egyptians when an Italian maritime company bought the Asab area from the Sultan of Dankalia, and the advancement of Italians into the highlands of Eritrea was then secured. This ensured the Ethiopian ambition to get a foothold on the Red Sea literally died a natural death. Italy colonized Eritrea in the late 19th century, but its ambition to conquer the Abyssinian Empire was crushed at the end of the 19th century when it was defeated by the ragtag army of Emperor Menelik at the Battle of Adwa. Thus, Abyssinia, or Ethiopia, remained uncolonized for the most part of the 20th century. It was during this period that Emperor Menelik expanded Abyssinia to the east, west, and south to create the modern state of Ethiopia as we know it today. He was not bothered of gaining a port and opted for the more fertile and expansive land to the south of Abyssinia. Any claim by Ethiopia of a conspiracy by colonial powers to encircle Ethiopia into a landlocked state is pure misrepresentation of history. It was never meant to remain an uncolonized space anyway. It was in that vein that the Italians invaded and occupied it in 1935. After World War II, Eritrea and Ethiopia were federated under the sovereign crown of the Emperor Haile Selassie by a UN resolution. The UN resolution 390 AV of 2nd December 1950 only linked Eritrea as an autonomous state to the sovereign crown of the emperor and not to the Ethiopian government. The federation was meant for 10 years, after which Eritreans will hold a referendum to determine their future. However, the emperor decided to abolish the Eritrean government and fully annex Eritrea as one of his provinces. This gave Ethiopia the Red Sea coastline and full access and control to the ports of Massawa and Assab. This 30-year period is critical. It's within living memory for many Ethiopians and leaders, and is misconstrued as a historical anomaly that recently severed the right of port control by Ethiopia. The fall of the Mengistu regime and the subsequent victory of the Eritrean War for Independence culminated in paving the way for Eritrea to hold a referendum as part of its right to self-determination in the unfinished decolonization process and according to international law. Eritrea's international recognition as a sovereign state made the illegal occupier Ethiopia a landlocked state. This is what is now being stopped as a traumatic event and framed as a national loss. The modern legal basis for Ethiopia's claim is virtually non-existent under current international law. The principle of uti possidetis juris, respect for colonial borders, that is, and the right to self-determination are the cornerstones of the post-colonial global order. Eritrea's independence is legally recognized by the UN and the African Union, and Ethiopia itself accepted it, despite its laughable argument of late that it would withdraw its recognition of Eritrea in order to nullify Eritrean sovereignty. Therefore, from a strict legal standpoint, Ethiopia has no claim to Eritrean territory. Its historical arguments are based on a pre-colonial and brief modern period of control, which do not override the current sovereignty of a recognized state. The recent more vocal claims, particularly from Prime Minister Abiy, are driven by a confluence of powerful motives. It's essential to analyze these separately from the domestic crisis you mentioned, though they are directly connected. So this is the most immediate, overwhelming economic necessity is the most immediate and powerful driver. Ethiopia is a nation of over 120 million with claims of a rapidly growing economy, even though the population figure is debatable among Ethiopians themselves. Dependence on Djibouti, over 95% of Ethiopia's import-export trade currently transits through the port of Djibouti. Ethiopia claims that this makes its economically critical, it makes its economy critically vulnerable. It gives highly inflated port fees by Djibouti to be massive and cause drain on the national treasury. On the contrary, Djibouti presented a drastically smaller amount of port fees, thus dispelling Ethiopian claims not to be true and highly exaggerated. Ethiopia also claims that any political instability in Djibouti would be catastrophic and that it would be an existential threat to Ethiopia. Such claim can only leave one wondering how Ethiopia hasn't been able to diversify its port access from its other neighboring littoral states. It also begs the question why it chose to have only one outlet all along. And then the argument of economic sovereignty, while reliance on a single port owned by a sovereign nation is seen as a major strategic weakness, Ethiopia argues that gaining direct port control would significantly reduce costs, increasing logistical efficiency and provide a massive boost to economic development. The Ethiopian problem stems from its misguided argument. The simple question here is, how do you get access to port control if that is not considered annexation? unless maybe there are literal states who are willing to sell or just give away a sovereign territory to Ethiopia. It can only be one way to acquire such a territory. That is the use of force. And then the argument of nationalism and geopolitical posturing, diverting attention from domestic crisis, like we said earlier. This is a classic political strategy. By invoking a powerful unifying national issue, like control of a seaport, a leader can attempt to rally a fractured population against an external challenge. It shifts the public discourse away from internal conflicts, ethnic violence, and economic hardship. Your observation about the domestic crisis is astute. The sea claim can be a tool to manufacture national unity with the hidden agenda of weakening internal opposition, despite the fact that the drive to annex a port is truly a very dim prospect for success. And then the argument of asserting regional power status. Ethiopia sees itself as a historical and demographic hegemon in the Horn of Africa. Being landlocked is seen as an affront to this status. Prime Minister Abiy's rhetoric about the Red Sea is part of a broader ambition to position Ethiopia as an indispensable regional power, at par with Egypt or Saudi Arabia in their respective regions, and among the top 5 in Africa. While there is no problem to have such an ambition to be one of the top regional powers, it is humiliatingly farcical to base such ambitions on aggression and annexation of sovereign territories and international lawlessness. The United States has always tried to use Ethiopia as one of its anchor states proxies in Africa, in which it uses its geographic position on the Horn and its population size to implement its self-interest in the region. This has misled many Ethiopian leaders to think of Ethiopia as an invincible and hegemonic state in the region. Ironically, none of its neighbors think it is capable of being a hegemonic power of the Horn region, nor an economic powerhouse with the capability to steer economic growth in the region. The marker that all use to have such views of Ethiopia is its massive poverty, hunger, underdevelopment, internal division, and consistent civil wars. While the West always speaks about its military capabilities to be among the top in Africa, in actual terms, it is a fact that Ethiopia never won any war or battle on its own against anyone, starting from the famous Battle of Adwa in 1896. And then changing the regional dynamics is another argument, the new geopolitics of the Red Sea. The Red Sea has become a strategically contested waterway with major powers like China, with a base in Djibouti, the UAE, US, Saudi, France, and Turkey increasing or maintaining their influence. Ethiopia fears being locked out of this strategic theater. Its Red Sea discourse is a way of asserting its stake in the region's future. And there is this perception that Eritrea is not stable. Ethiopia's leadership may be calculating that the long-term future of the Eritrean state is uncertain due to its authoritarian and isolated regime. This is what they call it. By keeping the issue alive, Ethiopia positions itself for any future geopolitical shifts. They also think that Eritrea is an isolated state, therefore sustaining their pressure on Eritrea could force it to come to the table to discuss Ethiopian expansionist ambitions and possibly arrive at an agreement in which it would relinquish its support to Ethiopia. Ethiopian leaders thought that the world would stand on their side this time after miserably failing on their attempt to annex part of Somaliland by sidelining the government of Somalia. As things stand now, this is not the case, and everyone is pushing back on Ethiopia after realizing what they call in English access actually means port control or annexation in Amharic. Senior government officials and military commanders followed the prime minister to openly declare war on Eritrea by claiming control of our support by any means. So addressing the apparent contradiction, that is sea claim versus domestic crisis, you are correct to point out that the seeming paradox. Why focus on a geopolitical ambition when the country is on the brink of collapse? It's not an either or for the government. From the government's perspective, the sea access is a long-term solution to the perceived economic woes that underpin the domestic crisis. They argue that sustainable food security and economic development are impossible without securing an affordable trade route. For a leader that's faced by a quagmire of immense internal pressure that he created, a nationalist cause can be a more immediately useful tool for political survival than the slow, difficult, and often thankless work of solving deep-rooted internal historical conflicts. It changes the narrative. Is this a high-risk gambit? Well, the strategy is incredibly dangerous. It has already alarmed Somalia due to the MOU with Somaliland, angered Eritrea, and worried other neighbors and the international community at large. It risks isolating Ethiopia and triggering a regional conflict that would exacerbate the very domestic crisis it is supposedly meant to distract from and bring the balkanization of the country. Ethiopian leaders have made the habit of insisting to claim presence on the Red Sea due to a potent mix of misplaced historical ambitions, economic desperation, and failed state stature, in which national leaders only come with sub-national and tribal agenda instead of an agenda for Ethiopia. While the historical basis is emotionally and politically resonant within Ethiopia, the legal basis in the modern era is non-existent, and Ethiopia lives on diminished regional hegemonical dreams. As explained, the real motive behind the recent claims is multifaceted. A cover-up of domestic political maneuvering to unify a fractured nation, a means to sustain power by the ruling ethnocentric elite and divert attention from the failed national economic security and pretend to assert Ethiopia's place in the changing region. The domestic crisis you mentioned do not make the Red Sea claim irrelevant. Rather, they help explain why a government might choose to amplify this particular issue at this specific time, using it as both a diversion and proposed panacea for the nation's profound challenges. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador Girmay. And then let me move to the second question. The second question is, why haven't the United Nations or the international community imposed sanctions on Ethiopia for threatening Eritrea over the issue of ASAP?
Another excellent question. This question gets to the heart of the real politic and touches on the often stark difference between international law and international action. Building on our discussion above, a critical analysis reveals that the lack of sanctions is not an endorsement of Ethiopia's rhetoric, but a result of a complex calculation of interests, risks, and geopolitical realities. Here is a critical breakdown of why the UN or the broader international community has not imposed sanctions on Ethiopia for its threats against Eritrea over the port of Asab. One is the primacy of stability over sovereignty in a volatile region. The Horn of Africa is considered one of the world's most fragile regions. The international community, particularly permanent members of the UN Security Council, prioritizes an assessment of their own interests when considering a fragile stability over any principle that might trigger a wider war. Fear of a regional conflagration of powerful nations are not in control of. A full-scale Eritrea-Ethiopia war would be catastrophic. It would not be a repeat of the 1998-2000 border war, but a much larger regional conflict that would directly disrupt a major international maritime trade corridor. The spillover would also immediately destabilize Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, Djibouti, Egypt, Kenya, and Saudi Arabia, creating a humanitarian disaster of unimaginable scale and opening new avenues for terrorism and collapse of nations. For world powers, containing this potential fire is a higher priority than punishing Ethiopia for threats. In one of my discussions with a Western diplomat stationed in Southern Africa, I was told that one of the major hesitations by the West to call a spade in the Horn of Africa is because despite its internal crisis, Ethiopia is the second most populous country in Africa, a member of the UN Peacekeeping Club, and a major contributor to UN peacekeeping missions, and the traditional diplomatic hub of the continent. I was also told that its total state collapse would be a geographical earthquake far greater than the collapse of the Somali state in the 1990s. The international community is therefore extremely hesitant to take actions, like sweeping economic sanctions that could precipitate such a collapse. Sanctioning Ethiopia is even as punching a hole in an already sinking lifeboat, with everyone nearby getting soaked. I was blown away by this explanation and also started to wonder what all those discussions are when a Western diplomat visits Addis. It's also a clear indication that no matter what we do or say, nothing is going to change with the Ethiopian leaders in as much as the West and other big powers are concerned. It's like babysitting a crying baby, a demon they created themselves. And then the geopolitical chessboard, competing interests of major powers is another reason. The Horn of Africa is a theater for intense political competition, and Ethiopia has been an important piece on the board up to this point. The conflicting interests of global powers create a paralysis of the UN Security Council, making a unified sanction regime impossible. Historically, the US viewed Ethiopia as its primary anchor state in the region for counterterrorism and policing the Horn of Africa region. While the relationship has soured due to the recent war in northern Ethiopia, the strategic desire to maintain a partnership and counter Chinese and Russian influences still remains. The US will apply the diplomatic pressure, but it is unlikely to champion sanctions that would push Addis Ababa firmly into the arms of its rivals. Especially the entry of Ethiopia into the BRICS fold was a one point of concern for the US, even though at this point in time, that fear is no longer critical because Ethiopia failed to become an important asset of the club, and its real intention to join the BRICS was to get debt relief anyway. So China has massive investments in Ethiopia, infrastructure, railways, manufacturing, mining, as part of its Belt and Road Initiative in Africa. Beijing opposes any form of interference in internal affairs and would almost certainly veto any UN Security Council sanctions resolution, protecting its significant economic and strategic interests. Russia is seeking to expand its influence in Africa and has been courting the Abiy government. It portrays the West as bullies and positions itself as a partner that respects sovereignty. Russia would also likely block any sanctions effort, using it as an opportunity to weaken Western influence and gain a firmer foothold in the Horn. Gulf powers, UAE and Saudi Arabia especially, the United Arab Emirates that is, both nations have complex and competing interests on the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa. They have invested heavily in Ethiopia's economy and ports in the region, especially the UAE in Djibouti and Somaliland and Saudi, with huge mining and port development prospects in Eritrea that could shift economic interest away from a troubled Ethiopia in the longer run. United Arab Emirates also have a fraught relationship with Eritrea because they lost their possession at the port of Asab. The primary goal for the Saudi is regional stability to protect their investments and their southern Red Sea flank from conflict. They will work behind the scenes diplomatically to de-escalate rather than support public punitive measures like sanctions. Egypt's role is hyped by Ethiopian propaganda, but also has attracted unusual attention by Cairo. The presence of Ethiopia on the Red Sea hasn't gone down well with Egypt and Saudi. Thus, an active involvement with Eritrea is believed to create the required balance of interest on the Red Sea security. This positioning has always allowed the bigger powers to play down any possible sanctions against Ethiopia, which also shows the real weakness of Ethiopia and militarily dominating the region. International law and sanctions regimes are typically triggered by overt acts of aggression or counter interest to big powers, and not by speeches and posturing, no matter how belligerent. The art of plausible deniability is what Prime Minister Abiy is using, and his officials have been deliberate to frame their demands in terms of peaceful access and dialogue when they speak in English. But it is a different story when his other officials and military commanders make overtly threatening statements in Amharic and other local languages. This creates a diplomatic gray area. Western diplomats will privately condemn the rhetoric as unhelpful and inflammatory, but they lack the legalistic cause to move towards sanctions as long as Ethiopian troops remain on their side of the border. The Somalia-Somaliland MOU as a precedent, the international community's response to the Ethiopia-Somaliland port deal is instructive. There was universal condemnation, calls for respect for Somalia's sovereignty, and statements that the MOU was null and void. But no sanctions were proposed. This sets a precedent. Even when Ethiopia takes a concrete action that violates a neighbor's sovereignty, the response is diplomatic and political, not punitive through sanctions. Threatening Eritrea, a state already under isolation, is seen as an even less likely trigger for sanctions. So the Eritrea problem, a lack of sympathy for the victim. No? While Eritrea's sovereignty is legally inviolable, it is perceived to have very few friends in the international community. This lack of sympathetic victim reduces the impetus for sanctions against Ethiopia. Some of the perceptions include Eritrea is a pariah state. Eritrean government is itself under unjust unilateral sanctions for its role in the Tigray conflict. It is isolated, authoritarian, and viewed as an unpredictable actor. Many Western capitals have a pox on both your houses attitude towards the Ethiopia-Eritrea feud. A perceived capacity for self-defense, Eritrea is not seen as a weak, helpless state. It maintains a large, highly militarized society and has proven its defensive capabilities. The international calculus is that Eritrea can deter Ethiopian aggression on its own, making external intervention through sanctions less necessary on Ethiopia. This was proven during the 1998-2000 war. Despite Ethiopia falsely claiming that it won that war, it was Eritrea that was sanctioned by the UN on fabricated and totally unrelated reasons in a bid to weaken its defense capabilities against Ethiopia. Therefore, the inaction calculus by the West's lack of sanctions against Ethiopia is not a green light. It's a reflection of a grim international calculus. The risks of triggering a wider war is too high. Ethiopia is considered too big to fail, and sanctions could catalyze its collapse. Geopolitical rivals would block any UN action, making it a non-starter. The threshold for sanctions requires overt military aggression or counter big power interests, not just threats. The target of the threats, Eritrea, commands little international sympathy, depending which capital you're talking to, or seen as capable of its own defense. So in a sense, the international community is choosing to manage the crisis through back-channel diplomacy and pressure, believing that the catastrophic consequences of imposing sanctions or the subsequent war they fear it might not prevent far outweigh the benefits of punishing Ethiopia for its belligerent rhetoric. It is a cynical stance, realpolitik over principled enforcement of sovereignty. So that's why the international community is reluctant to impose sanctions on Eritrea.
Thank you, Honorable Girmay. Just let me move to the third question. So hopefully we're going to have enough time. Is this claim over the port of Assab and even re-annexation of Eritrea or any of its parts, that's supported by the Ethiopian people?
Well, this is a critical question that goes to the heart of the domestic legitimacy of the current Ethiopian government's stance. Based on a critical analysis of the reality on the ground in Ethiopia, the answer is complex and cannot be reduced to a simple yes or no. Support by the people of Ethiopia to such expansionist agenda is fragmented, manipulated, and deeply intertwined with Ethiopia's internal political crisis and a very deep and misleading myths that developed over a long period of time. The grand ambition by all kings and leaders of Abyssinia and Ethiopia to conquer a port or territory on the Red Sea has caused endless bloodshed over the centuries and continues to this day as an agenda to rally the very fragmented and fractured national unity every time it reaches a low point in Ethiopia. To mention a few perspectives, the official narrative and manufactured consent is that the Abiy Ahmed government is actively promoting a nationalist narrative to build support for its Red Sea ambitions. This creates an illusion of widespread public backing through state media messaging, through exploiting historical grievances, through us versus them dynamic, by presenting an external threat to the international community or obstacle, that is Eritrea. The government attempts to temporarily unite a fractured populace against a common enemy, a classic diversionary tactic from the current deadly civil war raging in Ethiopia today and undermining the regime itself. In this context, public rallies and orchestrated shows of support can create a perception of mass approval, but this is often a top-down phenomenon. And there is the apathy on internal opposition. Beneath the official surface, there is considerable dissent, opposition, and apathy. Ethno-nationalist priorities for many of Ethiopia's ethnic groups, pressing internal issues are far more urgent. These include the aftermath of civil war in Tigray, Amara, and Oromia that may have claimed over 2 million lives and caused massive destruction of property and infrastructure, massive internal displacement, economic hardship, inflation, and hunger affecting close to 90% of the population, land disputes and internal border conflicts posing as sources of continued internal violence and conflict. For these communities, a costly foreign adventure over a port is a distraction from and exasperation of their immediate suffering. So, lack of a unified Ethiopian people, the concept of a monolithic Ethiopian people is a myth. Ethiopia is a collection of distinct nations and nationalities with often competing historical narratives and political aspirations. A claim rooted in an Abyssinian-centric imperial history may not resonate with groups who were themselves conquered and incorporated by the same empire. Many Ethiopians, especially the educated urban class and business community, are likely skeptical. They understand the immense economic and military cost of the conflict with Eritrea and see it as a dangerous gamble. They see it as a dangerous gamble that could further destabilize the country. The critical distinction is this access or annexation? This is the most critical point of divergence. Public opinion is highly susceptible to how the question is framed. The government's strategy relies on deliberately conflating these two concepts, using the broad desire for access to build tacit support for the more aggressive policy of control. Support for access, if the question is, should Ethiopia have peaceful, guaranteed, and affordable access to the sea, the answer from most Ethiopians, or even Eritreans for that matter, would likely be a resounding yes. This is presented as an economic necessity and legitimized by international law, law of the sea, and international maritime law. Support for annexation or war. If the question is, should Ethiopia go to war with Eritrea to annex Assab and parts of its territory? Support would likely plummet dramatically. The human, economic, and diplomatic costs of such a venture are recognized as catastrophic by many. This is also coupled with the inability of the Ethiopian army to achieve anything close to that objective. Many international partners and observers also do not see how this could serve the national interests of Ethiopia. Historical context of bloodshed, all historical ambitions on this have been a regional or ethnic-driven agenda by contemporary leaders in Ethiopia. For example, the current Ethiopian government, an Oromo-dominated elite, has already declared that the Kush or Oromo Empire extends from the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. This makes it clear that the Assab agenda is not an Ethiopian agenda, but a group agenda. Overwhelming reality that makes the port claim seem so detached to many Ethiopians. Placing the Red Sea ambition within a centuries-long pattern of using expansionist wars to rally a fractured nation is a critical and often omitted point on the Eritrea-Ethiopia relations. It can clearly reframe the current rhetoric not as an anomaly, but as a latest iteration of a destructive historical cycle. It's and has always been a deliberate state strategy, historical manipulation, and the exploitation of deep-seated national fractures. Therefore, to say the claim is supported by Ethiopian people is an overgeneralization. A more accurate assessment is that the Oromuma Ethiopian government is actively manufacturing consent for its agenda by exploiting a genuine economic concern, need for sea access, and a historical grievance, loss of Eritrea. However, the manufactured support is shallow, fragmented, and competes with the overwhelming priority of most Ethiopians, which is to resolving the country's profound internal conflicts and economic crisis. Historical contest of bloodshed, placing the Red Sea ambition within a centuries-long pattern of using expansionist wars to rally a fractured nation, is a critical and often omitted point. It reframes the current rhetoric not as an anomaly, but as a latest iteration of destructive historical cycle. Significant portions of the population are either opposed, apathetic, or will withdraw their support the moment the abstract claim translates into concrete realities of war and international isolation. The unity presented is a fragile facade built on subnationalism and diversion, not a reflection of a deep, unified national will for reannexation. Identifying the current government's ambition as a specific subnational Oromuma or Kush Empire project, rather than a pan-Ethiopian one, utterly dismantles the idea of a unified national will. It reveals the claim as a tool for a specific ethnic elite, which in turn explains why it fails to resonate with other major groups in the country. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me go to the number 4 questions. What role does the United States play in this kind of situations? This is more important to view from its historical role and its policy on Eritrea and the geopolitics of the Red Sea and the Greater Horn of Africa.
Yeah, the role of the United States is not that of a neutral arbiter, but of a major power navigating a complex region where its strategic interests often conflict with its stated principles. Its policy is characterized by a fundamental and enduring contradiction. The enduring strategic paradigm, anchor state policy. Historically, the cornerstone of US policy in the Horn of Africa has been the identification and support of an anchor state, a local partner seen as large and stable enough to help manage regional security and serve as a platform for US counterterrorism and later counter-China initiatives. The Imperial Derg era, even before the Cold War, the US saw strategic value in the region. During the Cold War, this crystallized with Haile Selassie's Ethiopia hosting a key US communications base, Kanyo Station in Asmara, making it a critical ally. The Meles Zenawi EPRDF era, since 1991, following the Cold War, the US anointed Ethiopia under the EPRDF as its primary anchor state in the Horn of Africa region. Despite its authoritarian nature, the Meles government was seen as a capable secular bulwark against Islamic extremism in Somalia, Al-Shabaab, and a force for regional stability, basically translating to keeping Eritrea contained. The US provided billions in aid, intelligence, and military support, turning a blind eye to internal repression and a deeply flawed border process with Eritrea, which stoked the region for future conflicts. The central contradiction is principles versus interests. This anchor state policy has created a persistent and glaring contradiction in US conduct. On one hand, the US rhetorically champions the sacrosanct nature of colonial boundaries and the sovereignty and territorial integrity of nations, This is a cornerstone of the post-international order it helped build. On the other hand, to maintain its partnership with its anchor state, the US has repeatedly actively enabled Ethiopia's violations of these very principles. The 1998-2000 war between Eritrea and the EPRDF, US diplomacy led by Anthony Lake was widely perceived as favoring Ethiopia, reinforcing a sense of bias. In 2002 border ruling by the EEBC, when Ethiopia refused to implement the final and binding EEBC ruling, the US and international community failed to enforce it, even though they were designated as guarantors. They prioritized maintaining relations with the larger, more powerful Ethiopia over upholding international law for the smaller Eritrea. This was a catastrophic diplomatic failure that taught Eritrea that international law wasn't a guarantee when in conflict with superpower interest, and that is that its sovereignty could be negotiable in the eyes of great powers. The unjust sanctions on Eritrea from 2009 to 2018, the US led a UN sanctions on Eritrea based on unproven allegation of support for Al-Shabaab, a claim many analysts saw as a politically motivated move by the Ethiopian government and its allies to further isolate and punish Eritrea. This cemented the US role, from an Eritrean perspective, as an accomplice to Ethiopia's aggression. So the current dilemma and the shifting dynamics show that the US now faces a crisis of its own making with the Abiy Ahmed government. One, a broken anchor. The US's chosen anchor state is profoundly unstable. The genocidal war in Tigray, widespread atrocities, and internal fragmentation have shattered the image of Ethiopia as a stable partner. The US is caught between its historical investment in the Ethiopian state and the reality of its criminal and reckless behavior. To the Eritrean problem, the US had avoided meaningful diplomatic relations with Eritrea for over 3 decades. Years of hostility, sanctions, and isolation have left it with no leverage in Asmara. When it needs to influence events in the Horn, it has few channels to one of the most militarily significant and strategically located actors. The Red Sea chessboard, the US military base in Djibouti, Camp Lemonnier, is its most permanent African base. The Red Sea is a vital global choke point. The US is deeply concerned about the growing presence of China with its own base in Djibouti and Russia courting both Ethiopia and Eritrea. Ethiopia's belligerent rhetoric threatens to explode this already volatile theater and cause dramatically shifting alliances and causing one of the most catastrophic crises the world has seen in the Red Sea Basin and the Horn of Africa. The US role today, in the current crisis over ASAP, the US role is one of damage control and strategic confusion. It is unable to condone Ethiopia's threats as they blatantly violate the sovereignty it normally upholds and risk a catastrophic war. It is unwillingly to seriously punish Ethiopia. It is unwilling to seriously punish Ethiopia with sanctions or a full rupture in relations due to the too big to fail logic we discussed and the fear of pushing Abiy further into the arms of Moscow and Beijing. It is incapable of engaging Eritrea as a constructive partner due to decades of estrangement, thus requiring time to build trust and partnership going forward. Therefore, the US is left with weak diplomatic statements, urging dialogues and restraint, while the fundamental architecture of its policy lies in ruins. Its historical role as an enabler of Ethiopian hegemony has directly contributed to the current crisis, and it now lacks the tools, the consistency, and the credibility to effectively manage the consequences. The US is not a master of this chessboard. It is a powerful but increasingly frustrated player, watching as the pieces move in ways it can no longer control. This situation clearly shows that the many years of investment in its independence and self-reliance, Eritrea has become an unavoidable player on the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa geopolitical arenas. So this is the role of the US today.
Thank you very much. And let me move to the next question. The next question is, how can the younger generation of Eritrea and Ethiopia get involved in addressing these recurrent issues?
Yeah, excellent. And a crucial question that helps us move beyond state level rhetoric and historical grievances to the human level. The role of the younger generation is perhaps the most critical factor for a well managed future, and their involvement must be conscious, subversive of old narratives, especially Ethiopian and regional youth, and forward looking. The younger generation of Eritrea and Ethiopia can get involved in addressing these recurrent destructive issues through some of these pointers. The first frontier, or the critical education and narrative deconstruction. The most powerful weapon is a critical mind. Young people must actively seek alternative histories, go beyond state sanctioned school curricula and propaganda, engage with academic works, primary sources, and oral histories from both sides of the border to deconstruct the one sided nationalist myths they have been taught. And they need to challenge war rhetoric, recognize when leaders use the Red Sea or external threat card as a tool for domestic political diversion, use social media and art to expose these tactics and refocus discourse on critical issues that matter to development, collective peace, and security and growth. Promote digital literacy, learn to identify state sponsored disinformation and bot networks designed to inflame tensions. Create and share content that fact checks inflammatory claims. Engage to disengage narratives that serve hegemonic interests. The other one is building people to people bridges despite the negative state propaganda. Governments may close borders and stop hostility. Young people can build their own connections, leverage social discourse, use social media and online forums for direct dialogue. The goal is not to agree on history, but to discover shared contemporary struggles, as well as create a bridge to debate and reconstruct the broken history and opportunities for peaceful coexistence. Building solidarity on shared challenges, build cross border solidarity on issues that affect all youth, regardless of nationality, climate change, integrated border markets, and the fight against conflict and isolation. I think we are seeing this very much on this recent partnership or SUMDO initiatives along the border areas between Eritrea and Ethiopia. And then also there needs to be an advocacy for a new political culture. The successful Ethiopian leaders are often trapped in a zero-sum game and militaristic mindset. The youth must advocate for a different paradigm. Champion diplomacy over militarism, and both countries encourage the youth to adopt platforms that prioritize peaceful cooperation, respect for sovereignty, and economic integration as the basis for access, not coercion. Reframe the sea access debate, shift the conversation from an ethno-nationalist entitlement to a practical regional issue. Advocate for solutions grounded in international law, such as mutually beneficial transit agreements, port fees, and infrastructure development, rather than territorial claims. And to embrace a regional forward-looking identity. The future belongs to those who think regional coexistence. Think Horn of Africa youth, not just Eritrean or Ethiopian youth. Identify as part of a generation that can break the cycle of conflict. The problems of the 21st century, climate change, economic integration, technological advancement require cross-border collaboration. Develop economic vision, study and promote models of economic cooperation, profitable marine corridor trade, transit economies, and the blue economy. Imagine a future where national economies and trade fuels collective growth, creating jobs on both sides of the border instead of fueling armies. The younger generation's task is not to resolve the historical debates of their grandparents, but to build a new and futuristic reality. They are uniquely positioned to do this because they are digital natives, able to bypass mental boundaries, less invested in historical distortions, but facing a shared regional future. The consequences of continued conflict, poverty, isolation, repression will fall most heavily on them. Their involvement requires courage to change, enhanced powers, and the imagination to see beyond the map of conflict they inherited. Their most powerful role is to become a constituency for peace and cooperation, making it politically costly for any leader to choose the path of war. So, if we can take a pause here.
Yeah, let me give you a minute or two break for the coffee or water
No,
time.
no, not necessarily a break for me because I have my water here.
Okay,
But
there you go.
not necessarily a break for me. But um, if there are any critical points of discussion that you may want to raise from what we have been saying so far, it would be good.
I do have one question from the participant, but just I was waiting to finish my questions already from the members. But just let me introduce you that question, and then you're gonna be discussing on that one. But before that, is anybody wants to add some questions to him? You can call and then raise it. But just let me read it. One of the questions, Girma, if you will. Hello, Ben. My question today will be most Ethiopian and politicians and motivators or activists say when the question of port comes, they said this is not a time. What does that mean? That's what I said that. So that's the question what we have from one of our followers. So we can inject that question there. And then at the same time, if anybody wants to say something for a minute or two, I'll give you a chance too. So if you call on 702-619-4203, in the US you can call direct calls, and other places you can call with WhatsApp. So I can give you a chance to say something.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is a very interesting question that many people keep asking a lot of times. Remember, we speak many languages. So when we try to say something in Tigrinya and people try to translate or to say it in Amharic or to say it in English, it loses its original meaning. So because we speak multiple languages, sometimes we lose the real idioms or the real meanings of things. When a politician says it's not time in Ethiopia to discuss about ports, they literally mean let's move this agenda for another time. It's not let's close the agenda. So it is prioritizing what is now most urgent at this point in time, while putting that in Amharic. So that's what it means when politicians and media people and those who get to hold the microphone a lot. That's what it means. But when an average, simple Ethiopian on the street says that, it is not agenda setting. It is like what I was trying to say earlier, that what matters to him is not port, but the fact that he survives today, the fact that inflation is disrupting his life, the fact that he's not having access to jobs and wealth and so on. So for him, it's a statement to say, I really don't care about that. There are other more important issues for me. That's what it means. So Amharic, ጊዜው አይደለም does not necessarily mean that it is going to be put in the back burner like a politician would mean. ጊዜው አይደለም means don't you have any human decency? Don't you have any morale? Don't you have any respect to people dying, people suffering, wars raging in the country, people and properties being destroyed and so on? said that is more important. So this is what it means mostly when these people, the layman, is saying that in Amharic, Gizewa Dedlem means it's not necessarily an important question. So that's what it means. This is how I read it.
Okay, thank you. And then so far there is no other questions as text or nobody calls. So let me go to the next questions. What are the key factors that can explain the local shifting of alliances, the role of external power and their interests, the geopolitical anchors to keep the balance of power and then sustain peace?
Okay, so let me go at them one by one. So let's start with the local shifting of alliances. So local alliances are notoriously fluid, as you know, and they're driven not by ideology but by immediate survival and tactical advantage. The politics of regime survival, alliances are primarily tools for leaders to maintain power. Today's enemy can be tomorrow's ally. If it helps crush a domestic threat or secure an external patron, the Eritrea-Ethiopia rapprochement in 2018 is a prime example where the two governments aligned against a common threat. And then there is the regional peace and security. This is a dominant logic. Somalia and Eritrea are long-time historical allies due to shared colonialism and coastal sultanates have nurtured a deep friendship during the war for independence of Eritrea. This alliance stayed intact to this day, in which they have cooperation and collective defense. The Red Sea and Gulf of Aden Council. This is a gathering which is gaining momentum and is transitioning into a collective security and regional cooperation platform that has brought together African and Asian littoral states around the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, these two water bodies. So I'm listing what are the alliances at the moment. And then the Egypt, Eritrea, and Saudi coalition on Red Sea. In recent times, the three countries have activated a regional security bloc with special emphasis on the Red Sea security. And then there is Eritrea and Sudan, a long-term strategic alliance that has grown deeper after the outbreak of the recent Sudan internal conflict. And then there is Ethiopia and United Arab Emirates, probably the most unholy alliance that is based on UAE's interest to gain access to ports on the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden using Ethiopia, and also access to farmlands in Ethiopia to grow food for UAE. Ethiopia is being used as proxy for United Arab Emirates in Somalia, Somaliland in particular, Sudan, and also port annexation agenda on Eritrea. Djibouti and Egypt, a strategic alliance that could allow Egypt to establish a base in Djibouti. This will help Egypt keep Ethiopia in check over its ambitions to get port control on the Red Sea. And then Turkey and Iran, still playing key roles, especially in the Gulf of Aden area. Their influence is being felt right across the region as we speak now. And there is this economic necessity as opposed to opportunism. The search for economic lifelines and access to ports, trade routes, and investment drives alignments, shifts, and is reconstructed. The Ethiopia-Somalia MOU is a clear case of Addis Ababa seeking expansionism in the name of economy and with the aim of establishing a naval force, regardless of diplomatic costs to its relationship with Somalia. So this is on shifting alliances in the region. So they are not static, they change, they come and go. It depends what the agenda of the day is. And then the other question you asked was about the role of external powers and their interests. External powers are not peacemakers, they are participants in a regional competition, and their interests often fuel instability. The roles are defined by the anchor state fallacy. Powers like the US and historically others have bet on a single powerful regional partner, like Ethiopia, Djibouti maybe, to secure their interests in the region and establish their military bases. This policy has failed as the anchor has itself become the primary source of instability in our region. and it leads to a biased approach that alienates other actors in the immediate region, such as Eritrea. And then there is the geopolitical competition, US versus China, US versus Russia. The Horn is a theater for great power rivalry. It has always been for centuries. China seeks economic integration and infrastructure contracts, Belt and Road Initiative, prioritizing stability for its investments. Russia seeks political and military inroads, often by offering military support without political conditions, positioning itself as an alternative to the West. The US is caught between its failed anchor state policy and the need to contain the influence of its rivals, leading to a strategic confusion, but now with the hope that they're drafting a new policy on Africa. Middle East power projection, Gulf states like UAE and Saudi Arabia see the Horn as their strategic backyard. They use economic investments, port deals, and military partnerships to secure the Red Sea's western flank against Iran and to advance their own economic ambitions, often playing all sides to maximize their leverage. And the other one you raised was the geopolitical anchors to keep the balance of power and sustain peace in the region. True stability will not come from a single hegemon, but from a balance that makes war too costly. The essential pointers are the inviolability of sovereignty and borders. The most critical anchor is a collective, enforced commitment to principles of uti possidetis. This was catastrophically undermined by the international community's failure to enforce the Eritrea-Ethiopia border ruling of 2002. Until borders are universally recognized as non-negotiable, revisionist claims will persist and chaos will continue. A functional regional organization, a credible, neutral, economic and security cooperation authority is required to replace the dysfunctional and lame IGAD in our region. It is paralyzed by the mutual suspicions of its members due to the decade-long control by Ethiopia. And then there is the economic interdependence. The most sustainable future is a shared economic interest by developing integrated infrastructure such as ports, railways, and power grids to benefit all countries of the region and create a powerful constituency for regional peace. The current model of zero-sum port access must be replaced by a vision of shared transit corridors and economic growth. A stable, sovereign Eritrea, a key player, often sidelined by the US anchor state policy, is a secure and engaged Eritrea. Its strategic location and military capacity mean that no lasting regional balance can exist that seeks to isolate, threaten, or dominate it. Eritrea is now an unavoidable player, and its sovereignty is a cornerstone of any future regional equilibrium. So these are the three things you had asked, and these are the
Thank you. And then let me continue the next one. Probably we might need to have maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So if we can't finish it, so we might postpone it. But almost 1 hour and 50 minutes we did. The next question is, can it be said that Eritrea is now establishing itself as a pivotal power on the Red Sea? If so, how will that influence its roles in the Horn of Africa and Nile Basin geopolitics?
Yeah, based on existing reality on the ground, the answer is a qualified yes. Eritrea is not a global power, but it is increasingly establishing itself as a pivotal and indispensable regional actor on both the Red Sea Basin and the Horn of Africa region. This is not due to economic size or population, but through a combination of strategic geography, political will, military capacity, and the failures of its neighbors and external powers. Looking at how its hard-won pivotal status influences its role in the Horn of Africa and the Nile Basin, mainly through strategic sovereignty and non-alignment. Unlike many regional states, Eritrea pursues a fiercely independent foreign policy. It is not beholden to any single external patron, US, China, Russia. This allows it to act based on its own national interest and form flexible tactical alliances, making it an unpredictable and therefore crucial player that all others must contend with. And then the military credibility and deterrence. Eritrea maintains a large, battle-hardened military on a permanent state of readiness. Its demonstrated capacity for self-defense makes military aggression by adversaries like Ethiopia a prohibitively costly option. This military credibility is the bedrock of its pivotal status. And then the failure of the anchor state policy. As we discussed, the US policy of backing Ethiopia as the regional hegemon has collapsed. The insulting power vacuum and Ethiopia's internal fragmentation have created a multipolar horn where a stable Eritrea naturally gains relative influence. And then the master of the southern Red Sea and the Strait of Bab el Mandeb. Its control over the strategic Dahlak archipelago and coastline opposite Yemen, as well as its towering position over the Strait of Bab el Mandeb, gives it a commanding position over a vital maritime choke point. In an area of renewed great power competition in the Red Sea, this geographic position is an invaluable asset and a major gateway to the $4 trillion blue economy market. So its influence on the Horn of Africa geopolitics, a balancer and a deterrent. Eritrea now has the capacity to be decisive balancer in regional conflicts. Its alliance with Somalia provides Mogadishu with a crucial strategic partner against Ethiopian pressure. Conversely, it can deter initiatives it perceives as threatening, such as any regional arrangement that excludes it or undermines its sovereignty. Second, the architect of a counter-hegemonic bloc. Eritrea is at the center of an emerging network of states wary of Ethiopian and United Arab Emirates dominance. Its strategic partnerships with Somalia, Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, and Saudi Arabia are not merely bilateral. They represent the formation of a loose coalition aimed at checking expansionist ambitions and ensuring the balance of power. 3. Shifting to pivotal partner. For external powers, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, even China and Russia, dealing with the Horn of Africa's complex security issues now requires engaging with Asmara. Its cooperation is seen as essential for mediating conflicts like in Sudan, or securing the Red Sea, forcing a shift from isolation to engagement. And then its influence on the Nile Basin geopolitics. 1. The strategic ally of the Nile downstream states, Egypt and Sudan. Other than its contribution to the Nile through its main rivers of Gash and Setit, Eritrea's most significant new leverage in the Nile game is its strategic alliance with Egypt and Sudan. Both Egypt and Sudan need reliable regional allies. Eritrea, with its staunch opposition to Ethiopian hegemony and its strategic location, is a perfect partner. 2. Elevating the Red Sea Nile nexus. Eritrea's role effectively merges the geopolitics of the Red Sea with the geopolitics of the Nile. Security in one theater is now directly linked to the other. The Ethiopian hegemonic campaign has moved from the dam to the ports, further affirming the security link between the two geopolitical regions and opening the door for Eritrea to start playing an important role in the Nile Basin politics and security. This gives both Egypt and Eritrea, through its enhanced role in the Horn of Africa, greater collective leverage as they can coordinate pressure across two strategic domains that are vital to Ethiopia's economic and military ambitions. Just imagine what it would have been like if the four nations, Egypt, Sudan, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, were working together for collective good. This region would have turned into a major powerhouse. Eritrea has maneuvered from a position of isolated vulnerability to one of pivotal influencer. It is not a hegemon, but it has become the linchpin of regional balance. Its influence will be exercised by its ability to form decisive alliances, provide military deterrence, and leverage its geographic position to support or destabilize the ambitions of larger powers. In the Horn, it is the core of a counter-hegemonic bloc. In the Nile Basin, it is a valuable strategic ally to secure stability. Its sovereignty is no longer just a domestic matter. it's a fundamental factor in the region's geopolitical equilibrium.
Okay. Let me add one question from one of our viewers. Said that, Ariflij, Ambassador Girmay, I have one question for you. Ethiopia violated Eritrean sovereignty by claiming the asset. The world expected Eritrea to file a complaint in the UN and an OAU, but ironically, Ethiopia filed it. And that's what the question is.
Well, what Ethiopia filed is a bunch of rhetoric and empty accusations. And what Ethiopia filed was not even presented to the Security Council. They pushed it aside. So it's just noise on an empty plate. And as Eritrea always says, Eritrea doesn't like dancing at an adversary's party. So what do we have to say? But if there is a legal consideration to what is happening, if the rhetoric is now supported with anything tactical or practical on the ground, then there will be basis for complaint. Maybe we will see it in the next question. What should Eritrea do going forward? There are a lot of diplomatic initiatives that we can do. A lot of the diplomatic initiatives we can do is also through public diplomacy and youth engagement. But going to the UN Security Council with a complaint requires a lot of stages of preparation and a lot of stages of fact collection and so on. Unless the permanent members of the UN themselves, the Security Council, want that action, then they will by any means do whatever they want. This is what happened to us in the past when they accused Eritrea of arming the Al-Shabaab, which was never proven by the monitoring group of the sanction UN monitoring group. And to this day, no evidence has been presented on what kind of support Eritrea gave to Al-Shabaab that warranted such a sanction. But because they wanted it, the objective was not really to prove anything, but it was actually to lock down Eritrea, and so that its ability to self-defense and its ability to stand up to threats from Ethiopia was weakened. And that weakening now will eventually allow Ethiopia to dominate over Eritrea affairs and probably even complete a regime change. That was the whole point. So it was an orchestrated thing against Eritrea, but there was no proof, and Eritrea did not do anything that would warrant sanctions. But when you are initiating something not also supported from the very beginning by those five powers within the Security Council, then it just falls on the wayside. That's exactly what happened to the Ethiopian claim or Ethiopian complaint. And also for us to do that, we also have to go through important procedures at this point in time. What we see on the ground is a lot of talk, a lot of shout, a lot of thing. Like I said, it's all meant to divert attention away from the internal crisis the country is going through. They're trying to create what they would think or what others have in the past used as a rallying cry, is to bring this port issue, Eritrea issue, as a national issue. So it's serving their own internal diversionary tactics more so than the actual threat to Eritrea. We know the Ethiopian army is in no position to engage in any kind of direct conflict with Eritrea. We know that the federal army has not even been able to defend itself properly and execute any major operation against the militias that are fighting it. So it's a collapsing army, it's a collapsing system, it's a collapsing nation. So really, militarily, I don't think Ethiopia stands as any meaningful threat to Eritrea. But what we have to look out for is, that one missile is enough to trigger something major. Maybe that may come as a sign of desperation, but I think the commanders on the ground will know whether that missile was really meant to start war or to provoke or a sign of desperation, and they will deal with it accordingly.
Thank you. And then let me move to the next question. We have two questions. Hopefully, we're going to finish it. The next one is, what do you envisage on development on the Horn of Africa, peace and then security post-Abiy regime in Ethiopia?
Okay. Envisaging the Horn of Africa's peace and security landscape post-Abiy Ahmed regime requires considering several potential scenarios. The post-Abiy era will not be a simple reset, but a critical juncture that could either plunge the region into deeper conflict or open a narrow pathway to stability. The future will be shaped by two overarching factors: the nature of the regime transition in Ethiopia and the subsequent recalculations by regional actors, especially Eritrea, Saudi, and United Arab Emirates. So if we look at first scenario, this will be a disintegration and regional contagion. This is a very high risk scenario. This scenario occurs if Abiy's fall leads to a violent, unmanaged power struggle and full-blown disintegration of the Ethiopian state. The central government in Addis Ababa collapses, and the warring ethnic nationalist factions like the Fanos and the Oromos and so on turn the country into a patchwork of fiefdoms or kingdoms in a full-scale civil war. The region could be impacted by massive refugee crisis. Neighboring countries, particularly Eritrea, Sudan, Kenya, and Djibouti, would be flooded with refugees, destabilizing their own stretched social and economic systems. The conflict would inevitably spill over borders. Amhara militias might clash with Tigrayan forces along the southwestern Eritrean border. Oromo groups might destabilize Kenya. The Somali region could become a battleground, pulling in Somalia. Security vacuum could be created by a collapsed Ethiopia and would create a vast ungoverned space, becoming a perfect breeding ground and safe haven for terrorist groups like Al-Shabaab and others, threatening the entire region. In this scenario, Eritrea would likely adopt a strong border doctrine. It would seal its border, engage in decisive military strikes against any hostile faction that approaches its territory, and could potentially be drawn into a protracted, multi-front, low-intensity conflict along its long border with Ethiopia. That is scenario one. Scenario two is the rise of a new hegemon. This scenario sees a new, equally nationalist and militaristic regime emerging in Addis Ababa, potentially from one of the major ethnic factions, or maybe even the federal army itself. A victorious faction seizes power and continues a policy of centralization and regional dominance, using the same expansionist rhetoric to consolidate internal control. And the core geopolitical dynamic of tension with Eritrea and Somalia would remain. The port obsession would likely continue as a tool for nationalist mobilization. The specific alliances might shift, and realignment of new alliances could emerge and complicate matters further in the region, but the underlying structure of a hegemonic ambition versus a counterbalancing coalition would persist. Eritrea would maintain and likely intensify its deterrence and alliance strategy. The existing counter-hegemonic bloc with Egypt, Somalia, and Gulf partners would become even more critical, formalizing into a more explicit military security pact aimed at containing the new threat from Addis Ababa. So that is the second scenario. The third scenario is a fragile opportunity for a regional reset. This is a guarded possibility. This is the most optimistic but also the most difficult scenario to achieve. It requires a political transition in Ethiopia that leads to a genuine, inclusive federal compact or confederation. A negotiated transition results in a government that acknowledges the catastrophic failure of the hegemonic model and prioritizes internal stability and good neighborly relations out of necessity. This could be led by politicians inside the country and in the diaspora. Regional de-escalation of tension by opening up to work with a non-belligerent government in Addis Ababa, the primary driver of regional tension, would be removed. A rhetoric of port annexation and hegemonic expansionism would cease. The region could then turn its focus to the economic recovery, rearrangement of peace and security measures, as we discussed earlier, and negotiating port, trade, and commercial access based on international law, developing shared infrastructure, and collaborating on common threats like terrorism. This is the only scenario where Eritrea's role could fundamentally shift from a pivotal deterrent to a pivotal partner. A stable, non-threatening Ethiopia would allow Asmara to demobilize part of its military, focus on its economic development, including its blue economy, and engage as a respected stakeholder in regional forums. It would have a vested interest in a stable neighborhood for trade, development, peace, and security. So, in a nutshell, the post-Abiy era will be defined by the power vacuum he leaves behind. If that vacuum is filled by chaos, scenario one, the entire horn will be consumed by fire. If it is filled by another strong man with a hegemonic vision, scenario two, the current Cold War in the region will continue, with the region locked in a costly and dangerous arms race. If it is filled by a legitimate, inclusive government that renounces expansionism, which is scenario three, there is a fragile but real chance for a fundamental reset and the aversion of a collapse of the state of Ethiopia. Ultimately, the key to peace and security in the Horn of Africa after Abiy lies within Ethiopia itself. The other regional actors, particularly Eritrea, have already defined their strategic posture based on the threat they perceive. A change in the nature of that threat from Addis Ababa is the single most important variable that will determine the region's future. So these are the
Thank
three
you.
I see.
Thank you, Ambassador. Just I do have one question from our members who sent the last question, but before that, I have three questions from the members who they sent. So let me give you those questions and then probably answer it in a short, and then we'll finish it in a short period of time. The first question is from Tsaga Hapte. Tsaga Hapte says, many Ethiopians say Eritrea is isolated from her mother. We must bring her back. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second question is from Eri Angelino, who is one of our admin. He says, Mr. Ambassador, do you think southern neighbors will disintegrate? If so, anytime from mind in your mind? And also he got another question. What is your prognostic evaluation of southern neighbors? Are we going to see new de facto states? And then let me add the last one, and then after that, I might have one more question, which is from the previous ones. This is Aklilu from Belgium. He said that Ethiopian Airlines cross Eritrean space. Mr. Ambassador, they use our space until now. When are going to be stopped? And then why we can't stop them? Those are the questions I have from the members I collected. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. On the first question, this notion that Eritrea separated from its motherland, Ethiopia. This is a myth and also a propaganda tool that was used by especially Emperor Haile Selassie when he said that we annexed Eritrea because it was coming back to its motherland. So the motherland debate is a debate of propaganda. For any reasonable person, all one has to do is to look into the history of how Eritrea was established, how Eritrean nationalism or patriotism developed, and what were the factors on the ground that created that historical event. If one can answer those questions, then all these issues of Eritrea broke away, it was a secessionist movement, it was Ethiopia was a motherland, all this now is just big talk and no meaning. Now, there is no historical evidence to support any of those arguments. So I think it was Zaga who asked that question, and I would say, there are even some very young Ethiopians today. I was even having one conversation with a friend or a young friend of mine who was telling me that Ethiopia never occupied Eritrea. It was the Italians who took it away from Ethiopia. So I mean, we deal with that. So, but what we know when people are saying that is highly likely that they are in that pro Ethiopian regime sentiment, or they have not read enough of the history. So as Eritreans, I would advise that please let us not waste our time on these kinds of shenanigans. They are just propaganda pieces that they don't have any historical base. And then with the second question, I think I was just talking about that. I gave you 3 scenarios, what is possible. So now, based on your question, will we see new de facto multi-states? Will we see disintegration of Ethiopia? Well, I don't think like that. I don't read like that. What I do is I do an analysis of what is happening right now, and then we set up scenarios. Scenarios usually help you focus your eye on the ball so that you're not distracted by these other things. So the 3 scenarios that I gave you, one is a state collapse, chaos, and the formation of what you just said, these many states in Ethiopia. So basically the balkanization of Ethiopia, the dismemberment of Ethiopia, and the rise of very many fiefdoms. We call them fiefdoms, are like small kingdoms. So that is a possibility if we go by scenario number 1. However, the country may be lucky enough that some strong man would come or strong woman would come and pull everybody together, centralize the country, but still having the hegemonic and dominance attitude that is bringing them into conflict with their neighbors. The same status quo as what is now, and will continue always, fighting, arguing, whatever. But that is the other possibility. It could even be a military takeover. It could be any one of those. And the third scenario, like I said, is maybe some miracle would happen. Maybe the number of Ethiopians who are fed up by all this could be more, and so therefore they might say, we don't want to go through this crisis. We don't want to go through disintegration to prove, no points. So we will stay united as a nation, but then we will just have to do away with some of our aggressive policies and our hegemonic policies and attitudes in order to live in peace with our neighbors and with ourselves. So that is, if we are very lucky, that will be another possibility. because at a point of change, especially change of systems, governments, it's quite difficult to predict what will come. For example, one of the potential forces for such a change in Ethiopia had mentioned would be the military, the federal military. But then when you look at the federal military itself at this point in time, its capacity, its composition, its missions, its acceptability by the populations, and so on, it is really just like another militia in Ethiopia, and people despise this institution. So I don't even know if there is any political space left for them to overthrow the government and come to power. They might be able to overthrow the government. They might be able to kill or make Abiy flee the country. They might be able to do that, but eventually, they are not really a force that would manage to control Ethiopia. All the militias, all the ethnic armies are all armed. They're fighting them. So they will not be the only gun holders in the country. So how are they going to establish a government? In the past, when Mengistu Haile Mariam overthrew the emperor's government, the whole army was with him. So, there was no disintegration, there was no dissent. So they were able to do that. But today's army, federal army in Ethiopia, I don't think can replace the current government in form of a coup d'etat and get away with it. I don't think that will be possible. To begin with, the majority of the commanders of that defense force are all from Oromo, from one area. So it's just another switch of an ethno-fascist coming to power. So I don't think they will manage. So these three scenarios are what we can focus on. Maybe, I don't know, if there are also other kind of scenarios that I did not take into consideration. But I think these three scenarios I presented are general enough to accommodate all possibilities that could come. But like I always say, at the last minute, when that change happens in any regime ending, you really don't know what really comes out of it. So you don't know what last minute configuration is going to look like, who is going to agree with who, what kind of pressures will be, made on the incoming power, what are the accommodations, and so on and so on. So we have, for instance, at this point in time, we see a collectivization of all opposition groups into one broad front to initiate public disobedience, a peaceful way of removing government. And if they probably become the force and are able to move a bigger agenda, and they are better organized, and the mission is clear to the people who will go out on the street, potentially to also give their lives, if that leadership is making sense to them, maybe that could be that final straw that we can hold on to in Ethiopia. Because if such a politically organized and politically minded group comes into the vacuum, they're highly likely that Ethiopia will survive. But the likelihood of such political group to come and fill that vacuum is still up in the air. We cannot really say, but the scenario approach is always the best one. And then if I move to the last question, Ethiopian airline flying over Eritrean airspace.
Yep.
Yeah, there is no politics in that. There's nothing. It's just a commercial airline conveying passengers. And for every crisscrossing over our airspace through the IATA, the International Aviation Organization, there is levies that they pay, or any airline pays, and that will continue. I don't think there is any military threat so far. A passenger plane, you can equip it with all kinds of cameras if you want to look down and to see what. But they have permanent satellites already. They see even much more sharper, much more clearer pictures. The espionage world is full of it. Even if you switch on your phone and look at the actual landscape, you can even get some real pictures. So a commercial airline flying over, it doesn't matter. I mean, Iran flights fly over, Israel flights over, everybody flies over. So it's commercial. Let's not worry too much about that, honestly. There is no particular threat, national threat or security threat because of these commercial flights.
Thank you very much. And then I think I've finished my questions. I have only one question left. I don't know if you want to go with that one or just let's finish it because I plan to 1 hour and 30 minutes. So we have been already 1 hour and 45 minutes. So I don't know.
Well, since we have just one question left, let's go.
Okay, Ambassador. So the last questions what I collect from our users is just what steps should Eritrea take in response to the threat coming from Ethiopia?
Yeah. Well, based on our detailed analysis of the situation, Eritrea's response should be a multi-layered strategy that prioritizes deterrence while actively working to diplomatically isolate Ethiopia. So one is to maintain a high state of defensive readiness and military preparedness. A credible, visible deterrent is the primary insurance against miscalculation by Addis Ababa. This makes the cost of any military adventure prohibitively high for Ethiopia. And then intensive diplomatic offensive with engagement with regional players of the Red Sea Basin and Horn of Africa. Deepen strategic coordination with Somalia, shared victim of Ethiopian expansionism. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Sudan, who view Ethiopian Red Sea control with suspicion. And then engaging with continental and other international fora. Keep the issue of Ethiopian aggression alive with the UN and Security Council members. Keep the African Union Peace and Security Council in the loop, and also all countries of the Horn region, especially Kenya, as it could be a target by the Oromuma expansion at a later stage. The above strategies should not be perceived as begging for intervention, but to formally record the threats and hold Ethiopia accountable in a multilateral setting, exposing its violation of the UN and OAU charters. So with the major powers engage directly with the US, as we are doing now, EU also, Russia and China also, highlighting how Ethiopian belligerence is the single greatest threat to regional stability, which undermines their own security and economic interest, if not deterred. And then we also need strategic communication. I suggest we launch a global PR and legal campaign targeting international media, think tanks, and academic institutions in order to address the negative narrative. The message should consistently frame the issue as a violation of sovereignty by Ethiopia. This is about the fundamental right of a nation to exist, not just about a port. Ethiopia's internal diversion, this is a desperate attempt by a failing regime to internationalize its profound domestic crisis. A threat to all, if sovereignty is violated here, no small state in the region is safe. It's also very important and timely that Eritrea upgrades and intensifies its outreach into African states. This is also an opportunity for Eritrea to mobilize the anti-unilateral sanction regime imposed on it illegally. And then the other way is to improve economic resilience, accelerate efforts to diversify the economy and strengthen trade partnerships, particularly with Middle Eastern and Asian partners, to reduce any potential long-term vulnerability with a focus on the blue economy of the Red Sea Basin. In a sense, the strategy must be to make the threat diplomatically costly and militarily risky for Ethiopia, and that the current regime is forced to abandon it, while simultaneously ensuring Eritrea is not diplomatically isolated. the goal is to shift the burden of consequence onto Ethiopia. So this is what I think Eritrea needs to do.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ambassador Gurmai Haile. Just let me give you the last chance. Just what do you want to say to our audience, at the same time for Eritrean youth and their friends? And then what is the main aim, what we have in this program, especially about Let's Talk in Eritrea? And then what kind of an opportunities and chances they have, anybody, if they want to join you, what they could do?
Well, primarily, like I said, what we want on this platform, Let's Talk Eritrea, is an interactive program. So I don't know what it requires to achieve that. But yes, sending in questions is one way. But sending in questions ends up overburdening the responses. So I think the best thing is to come here and to ask questions, and based on that, we will have a dialogue, a conversation. History and the kind of challenge that we have in Eritrea cannot be discoursed through just writing things. I think an interactive discourse is important. Young people should have access to resources. Young people should have access to people. Young people should have the opportunity to really come and engage and participate. That way, they learn better, they learn more. And also that generational gap, especially with wisdom, knowledge, and also experience that is being lost rapidly, now will be transferred. So I encourage young people to come. I encourage you, Binyam, to have a regular program for this. Is it once a month or is it whatever? I think if we regularize it, it will be important. In the meantime, you need to also be able to reach out to the young people to create that platform for them, either to send in their questions or come in person to engage with us. I am not sure. Well, if Saga, the one who asked the question, is the Saga I know, then definitely she's not my target. But if these other people who are asking Aklilu and so on, I hope they're young people, and next time also, hopefully we may be able to hear their voices through call-in questions. We really need to move to that level. It's an opportunity that should not be missed, and it's a kind of engagement that I'm also very much committed to. My two commitments are one to the youth of Eritrea who cannot speak Tigrinya or local languages, and the other one are Ethiopians, Amharic-speaking Ethiopians, who are deprived of real, true history and an understanding of current situation. So these are my two main targets when I appear on the media. And thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Honorable Gurmai Haile. Thank you for your precious time and then great effort and dedication to accommodate and give brief answer and then history for questions from our youth and participants about Let's Talk in Eritrea program. Honorable Gurmai Haile and then Sagahabte Vinak Media as a tool or means of communication with our users all over the world. So just if you have any questions, members and then audience participants, so you can call me at 702-609-4203 at Vinak Media through WhatsApp or direct line, and then I will try to communicate with you and then see the chances and opportunities how you can participate with that one. And then if you wants to have a talk with Gurmai Haile or Sagahabte, so I'll try to accommodate that situations too. But just this should be a responsibility of everybody, and we'll need to participate on that one. Some of our youth and then some of our audience and then admins, they are youngsters, probably Honorable Gurmai Haile, he didn't know you personally, guys, but just I know that most of you are youngsters. you give these questions, but just let's create a communication to be very close and then plan it what we can do in the near future. So instead of only very few people are working hard on that one. So at the same time, really just Honorable Girma Haile and Ms. Saga Hapte, thank you very much for giving an opportunity for Vinak Media also to be a participant in this programs and all that. So finally, what I will try to say is thank you very much, all participants, and then please share, like, and then subscribe Vinak Media, and then share this program to everybody to join us probably down the road in the future. So we might have an opportunity, a lot of youngsters to be participate here. And then you might send, if you don't want to talk, you might send via emails and all that, just, your questions. So just I'll pass it to Ambassador Girma, and then he will prepare on that one. And then we're going to have, like he said, that instead of coming once every so many months, or probably once a month, or maybe we'll have some kind of programs we'll try to do. So just, he is right. And then we'll work on that one. Other than that, just everybody, please subscribe, share, and then support Vinak Media. And then give me your comments, and then send your comments on the YouTube channel also what you have. And then at the same time, you can send an email for biniamsamarab@gmail.com. I'll pass your questions, comments, and everything to Ambassador Girma Haile and then Saga Hafte. And finally, just, that's the only thing what I can say. Unless Ambassador Girma Haile, you want to add the final words, otherwise we'll be finishing in our program here.
Well, thank you very much. I was just checking my phone. A very important person from Mozambique had joined us. I want to say thank you to her, and also quite a number of people from Zimbabwe also had joined in. That also I want to say thank you. These are people who have access to my networks. So I just want to say thank you to non-Eritreans who have participated, and I know also some friends from Kenya may have also joined as well.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your time and then efforts. Again, Vinak Media appreciate your participation and then efforts. Thank you. And then everybody have a good evening and have a good day. Have a good weekend with your family and loved ones. Bye.